everybody, for today's edition of our webinar, From Takeoff to Landing, 6 Steps to a Successful Microsoft Teams Pilot. And I'm so excited today to be back here co-presenting with the one, the only, Mike Giannotti. Why don't you say hi, Mike?
So, yeah, thank you, Dux, for having me. Very excited to be here. This is a great topic that, I mean, it's top of mind of a lot of my customers, and I know a lot of folks joining. So very happy to be here with you today.
And equally as excited, I'm Dux Raymond Sy. For those that I have not met, I serve as the CMO of AvePoint, but just like Mike, I've been in this industry for a long time and work with a lot of customers around the world. And like Michael says, this is top of mind. How do we get started, and really how do we think about and ensure that we have a successful Microsoft Teams pilot? So to get the show going, here are the key things that we're going to cover today. We're going to go through the 6 steps on really making sure that our pilot is successful. But before we jump on these 6 steps, you know, we want to really quickly talk about what a pilot is, what are some of the prerequisites that you need, and what are the things that you have to have in place before we start doing the pilot. So why do we need a pilot, Mike?
Well, I mean, you know, if you think about it, Dux, people are going to be rolling out, and this is unknown territory for a lot of these folks. So you want to make sure that what you're delivering is going to bring value to your end users, right? And like you say here, minimizing risk. A pilot will help you identify risk. It's going to help you to navigate and to iterate and look at the options and things that are out there, and know that when you finally roll out to the broader enterprise, you're delivering something that's going to benefit everybody.
And the third point, which is evaluating options, this is something I want to harp on. A lot of you watching, and you don't have to raise your hand, you're thinking, oh, Skype for Business is going away and Teams is a new Skype for Business. Well, if that's all you think, you're undermining and limiting what Teams can do. And I urge you, this is a great opportunity for you to really unleash the power of Teams, not just for chatting and calling. I mean, we could do it on a step basis, but the pilot can help you validate a lot of the other capabilities and the values, Michael says, that it can bring to your organization. So the pilot helps you evaluate what the options are.
And I would just harp on that as well, saying that, you know, the value of Teams, the chat, and, you know, the meeting function that you're, you know, migrating from Skype to receive here, that's just a small portion of it. In fact, I have a lot of customers that when they do their initial rollout, they haven't even rolled that piece out yet. And they're doing all the other value, which is the big chunk.
And last but not the least, when you do a pilot, this helps validate and confirm the benefits. We'll walk you through the process, how you figure out what the success criteria is, what the benefits are, and maybe some of the things you're thinking about doesn't really work or doesn't apply, and that's okay. And that lets you test and really have this controlled environment to figure out how you can best land Teams in your broader organization. So before we do a pilot, I know you've done a lot of this, Mike, with customers in the Eastern Seaboard, large customers. What are some of the prerequisites from a technical perspective? Is it just saying that I'm going to roll out Teams and call it a day?
And you know, and I do hear that a lot, because they hear Teams and they think, oh, it's just another application. But in fact, there are a lot of prerequisites. Teams really is a front end to so many of those best of breed services in the Microsoft 365 ecosphere that, you know, when you're talking about it, have you rolled out Exchange? Well, if you haven't rolled out Exchange online, you may have an issue, right? Or do you have the on-premise configured in such a way that it's up to date and ready to, you know, connect to the cloud? Are you dealing with SharePoint? Have you rolled out OneDrive? Because if you're not looking at those things, Azure Active Directory and others, you're going to be going ahead with a pilot or trying to do a pilot and saying, wait a minute, how come I'm not seeing my calendar? How come, you know, I'm not being able to attach things in a chat or conversation, et cetera? So there are those prerequisites you need to go through and take a look at. And that's where working with a Microsoft and AvePoint, looking at a technical prerequisite checklist like this, and really looking at what are those underpinning services is critical to having a successful pilot.
And this is important, right? While certainly when you introduce this to the business, you're not going to say, and I don't recommend, you don't want to go through all the technical nitty-gritty details of Teams, but from a implementation perspective, especially as IT, we should be crystal clear on the technical aspects of Teams. So this is a simple prerequisite checklist. And by the way, I'll show you some other checklists and templates later. But these are some of the core things you have to consider and think about. And part of that too is once you have the technical pieces in place, as Mikey mentioned. So let me. I'm going to grab a screenshots here because you mentioned something that's important, and I think for everybody here, it's important for you to have a good understanding of what Teams is all about. So, for example, right? So let me put this in. For example, when creating a team, you create a team. Essentially, on the back end, what happens is it creates an Office 365 group. And for those not familiar with what Office 365 group is, in short, it's a membership service. It's not an application. It's a keychain. It's a way to hold similar people together to use the same set of technologies. So when you create a team, a SharePoint site collection gets created. A shared calendar gets created for scheduling. A planner gets created. A OneNote notebook gets created. A distribution list gets created. So all these things gets created, and it's a prerequisite. You don't have a choice. And it's a good thing because Teams takes advantage of what's already there in Office 365. Now, as such, right, while you have all the technical pieces, what's equally as important is you have to establish the governance foundation. You have to think about, before you do a pilot, right, at the very base level, how are you going to allow these teams to be provisioned? Do you allow self-service, or are you having some kind of a provisioning process that you want to put in place? And once it's provisioned, how do you ensure policies are enforced? So it's one thing for people to provision teams in an organized way, but once they're using it, so let's say Mike, he's working on a project, he has a team. How do I make sure that he doesn't randomly change permission on SharePoint sites, or create 10,000 private channels, or invite people externally, right? So how do you enforce these policies? And then last but not the least, how do you manage information lifecycle? I mean, I'm sure a lot of you out there, if you have teams using for projects, for example, what happens to the team once the project is done? I mean, I hate to say it, a lot of them are just orphaned and just sits there, right?
Yeah.
It's the same wild, wild west problem. So how do you organize the life cycle of it? I'm not saying you have to have a full-blown plan around this, but you have to have a foundational governance structure in place before you do your pilot.
And as much as possible, just to kind of, add on to that, you want to operationalize that so that's automated processes, right? You don't want to put extra overhead. And what a lot of IT orgs don't realize is, as they're setting up that governance, that they can automate much of this on the back end so that, they can step back, enable the users, but keep things manageable.
Yeah. So with that, with those key things in place, let's talk about this 6th step. All right. To get going with a Teams pilot, first step is you got to define your objectives. You got to figure out why you're doing the pilot, and more importantly, what the success criteria is.
You don't want to just throw it out?
No, I mean, look, a lot of us are doing it because Skype for Business is going away. We know that, and that's fine. That could be the driver, but like I said, this is an opportunity for you to find more value out of it beyond the reason Skype for Business is going away. What other success criteria can you put in place when you do a pilot? Here's just some examples, right? The success criteria doesn't have to be, save the company a lot of money or help the company make money. I mean, those are great, but look at low-hanging fruits. And the way you do this is you work with your leaders in the organization or your department to figure out what pilot outcomes you want. This is a good way to think about it. Do you want the success criteria and the outcome based on an individual value? For example, your colleagues might be emailing stuff left and right. They have stuff in file share and SharePoint, and you find that Teams is a great one-stop shop and there's value to people in the organization, then that's great if that's the outcome you want to go after. Is it a cultural outcome or organizational outcome? And the key here is you want to figure out and come up with some kind of change quotient. What I mean by that is some measurable value, so you can say if your pilot was successful or not. So here are some examples.
Real quickly, just to kind of, what you were saying, and you really highlighted it good when you start talking about the email, right? A great way to start to identify some of those criteria you want to go after, and the ones that we're talking about, pilot examples, outcome examples that you're showing here, is to look for points of pain where people are struggling and doing things inefficiently and that are causing frustration.
And the good news is you don't have to search far and wide and figure out which system's going to integrate. There's all the day-to-day low-hanging fruits. Again, the inefficiency of email, or people figuring out where the latest version of the document is, or people scheduling conference rooms, or even as simple as people trying to get their email back because they deleted it, right? So I'll show you some more examples in a second. And the key is, when you identify your success criteria, your project, your pilot objectives, is you got to make sure you get some buy-in from leadership, not just IT, but from the business. I understand if you're a really large organization, it may be tough to get to the C-suite, and that's okay. Go to the business level, because you want to work with the people that technologies like Teams can help day in, day out.
Yeah.
So once you have your objectives, your success criteria, you want to go to the next step to identify who the pilot group of users and use cases would be, because you want to tie these success criteria to the use cases. And I love this. This is a work has been done not only around Teams, but through the years through SharePoint. Is think about what those scenarios are. I'm sure, Mike, you do a lot of briefings with customers. How would you describe what these scenarios are like? And is it hard to put together? Is it easy? What are your thoughts?
No, I think, and you kind of touched on it with the piece about SharePoint, this idea of how do people work together and what do they need to do? These are things that have been around and struggles that people have struggled with for years, right? And SharePoint early on tried to identify some of that. But as we look at, how people are doing projects, how they're, preparing for events, onboarding personnel, et cetera, there are a plethora of scenarios that start to come front and center that you can quickly get a hold of. And like you have here, there's going to be readily apparent stakeholders that you can get a hold of who are influencers, right, within the organization, and are probably struggling with this. And are my 2 cents here is, you want to find ones who are influencers, and also, because of their pain, are going to be tolerant of some hiccups along the way as they're testing this out, right? So they're going to be, more likely to slowly be able to, get a hold of what's happening. And if there's some hiccups along the way, they'll tolerate that and be willing to iterate and move on. But these are some great examples you have here, and it's showing their pain.
Yeah, I'm going to show you a quick demo in a second, but when you think about pilot group or users and use cases, again, go after low-hanging fruits. And when you talk to these people, ideally somebody influential and visible, because if it works for them, they'll be your biggest cheerleader. So that's what you want, right? So you got to do a little strategy here. Get people who will be cheerleaders once you do full production, and people will listen to them. A senior person like a VP or an executive assistant, they're the gatekeepers. And folks in sales, you know how a lot of our sales colleagues can have a lot of influence in the organization. So for example, once you figure out who these influential people are, what are their pain points, right? Talk to them about their pain points around the business. You don't want to go to them and say, all right, how do you like your teams? You want a planner? How many tabs? No, you don't go to technical approach. You talk about their pain point. So let me pick one example, like Bob here. One of the pain points he noticed, because he runs the help desk, part of operations, there's a lot of, now that they're in Office 365, he sees a lot of inbound support tickets around people wanting their deleted email or files back. I know you don't experience this, but some customers, folks delete their emails and delete their files. And as you know, in Office 365, 14 to 90 days after, it's gone, or sometimes not even the recycle bin. So Bob was saying, it takes up a lot of our IT resources to do this. While it's not hard, it's just cumbersome. They could be doing something else. So I want to show you something. So when our customer talked to us about this, we go, internally, we actually built our own bot. And we said our customers can use this. So we gave it away for free. You can actually download this today. No strings attached. It's in the Team store. So the bot is called AVA, AvePoint Virtual Assistant. So the purpose of this bot is provide the ability for an end user restore. So the idea is I can tell AVA, hey AVA, and it respects permissions and all that. I could just ask Ava, hey, can you restore an email for me? And then Ava will authenticate who I am, and she'll respond, what do you remember about the email? Subject sent to, I think the email has Office 365 in it. So as soon as I hit submit, and by the way, you can do this for files as well. Let's say you delete it from your OneDrive or SharePoint or Teams. And then Ava would find it and you can restore it. Now it looks so simple, but think about the value it provides our support team. So instead of dealing with these tickets, they can focus on heavy things that are more heavy, require heavy lifting. So that's one. But then second, the value provides me as an end user. I don't have to wait for IT. I can do it myself. Right. I can do it on my phone, right? Weekends, I don't have to wait for Monday. So these are the things you have to think about when you want to think about your pilot group in use cases.
And you know, just going back to what you said in the very beginning, again, to harp on that, we're moving well beyond just the traditional, right, voice and meetings. Here you're taking a look at what's this extended platform offering, right? Right. And then providing a real value scenario.
So here's a very practical template on how you can put together a business scenario. So think about your colleagues, right? As someone in sales, what are some of the things that they're doing that could be improved upon? I want to have a single version of a proposal. As you know, sales, they do proposals all the time instead of emailing it back and forth. And then this is where we can come in. Using Teams, we can conduct meetings and centrally store this proposal in a team, and we can work on it together, co-author on it together. I'll know it's successful when sales teams can create proposal quicker and send it out sooner, potentially landing the business sooner. And this is very business centric. And you also have to be cognizant that you prioritize it, because as you know, everybody wants everything for nothing yesterday. Let me repeat. Everybody wants everything for nothing yesterday. So you got to prioritize, right?
Yeah.
What's the low-hanging fruit? What's the best bang for your buck for your pilot? You can't do everything.
No.
Yeah. Mike, what's the most common things you see when people pilot? What are the most common use cases?
I mean, project management has got to be, you know, one of the just table stakes, because everybody struggles around. When we say project management, we're not talking Microsoft Project Online. It's, look, we need to share documents, we need to talk, we need to meet, we need to converse, we need a history. I mean, it's all those things, and how do we ease that? So that is a primary one. Event handling is another. Onboarding has been a big one that we've seen. And then lastly, training.
Yep.
Using it for training. So, I mean, those are all low-hanging, out-of-the-box type features, right?
So now once you have your pilot group identified, your business scenario, put together some kind of scorecard or a way to measure. This is an example. I'm not saying you have to do it this way, because it's one thing to say that teams can help improve project management, but you got to show it once you're done with a pilot.
Yeah.
You know, we save time, we reduce costs, or the experience was better, whatever it may be. So this is a simple example of what a business scenario scorecard looks like. And certainly you can tweak it to what's more relevant for you. But it's important to have something like this.
Yeah. I mean,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you do not do this up front, you're going to be stumbling around, and you really want to be crisp around what are we measuring and make it realistic, so that, you know, you'll know when you hit those metrics and you're able to move on and get out of pilot and start getting to production.
And you said something important. This actually sets expectations with the business. Because here's the thing, right? What's happened in the past, and again, you've been there, done that, where, oh, we're gonna pilot teams, go pilot teams and test it and let me know. But then we're not on the same page, right? And then the user can come back and say, oh, how come it doesn't do this? Or how come it's too hard to do that? By doing it this way, not only identifying the scenario, but also setting expectation on, okay, this is we want to track and measure I get it. You may want this other stuff, but that's not part of the pilot, right?
Right.
So you can come back and track and temper expectations.
Yep.
You were saying about HR onboarding, right? This is another example. So quickly, you want to put together a use case around HR onboarding for your pilot. The idea is, wouldn't it be cool if there's a more efficient way for HR to group a certain class together, if you may, and provide a better experience for new employees. So what's the issue? We currently have a formal onboarding process. However, there are limited opportunities to educate them about our culture and create a sense of inclusiveness. Solution? Because as you know, everything's through email, it's disjointed and all that. Bring everybody into teams on their first day at the organization. And once they're done that, they'll have that sense of togetherness and inclusivity, and then they can keep using the teams throughout their journey in the company. Define the benefits, again, define the metrics, and define who owns it and what the timeline would look like.
And this is huge. I mean, from personal experience, I have a colleague, so she's been with the org about 8 months, and I, got to do some early work with her, mentoring. But she was part of a cohort of folks hired out of their master's programs into Microsoft, and she has found it invaluable. They had the sessions where they're physically there, but then how do you continue to build that camaraderie, that support network system, expose them to opportunities? They have regular meetings, they do all that, and it's all handled through Teams, and it's just been a natural extension of how she works, and it's a great way to, this is a great scenario.
We have a great question. Is Ava available in GCC? So great question. In case other folks are not familiar, GCC is a government community cloud, and yesterday Microsoft just announced that GCC will now support bots and apps. We are working with Microsoft closely. It's not available today, but it will be available soon. We don't have the exact timeline because Microsoft just enabled bots and apps in GCC. Right. But it will come. So as all the other apps and bots as well.
Yep.
Okay, cool. You've identified your project objectives, pilot objectives, success criteria. That's step 1. Step 2, define your pilot groups and use cases. And once you have the use case, this is what Michael was talking about earlier. You have to automate things now. Yeah. It's one thing to have use cases, but there's also an ideal scenario where you take those use cases and automate it so people will do the right thing. Meaning, you don't want people to remember every single switch and every single button to click on if you just throw Teams to them, right? Even if you say, oh, you can use Teams for project management, but you got to create this team, create this tab. It's too much, especially for people not familiar or haven't used Teams. So you want to make it easy. You take the business scenario, apply the appropriate level of governance, and mind you, each group or each department, each team may be different, right? So here's an example. You can say, oh, Department A, based on their use case, no external sharing, retention 6 months. We're not going to allow self-service creation, everything that's through IT, and we need to recertify every 3 months because they're the legal team, right? So we need to put more governance around this. Whereas Department C, marketing, they can do external sharing with SharePoint Online. We're going to allow self-service creation for Joe, Sally, and Harold, and recertification 12 months. So you take those scenarios, map it to the technology, and automate the governance around it. And I'm sure in your experience, there's different ways to do this, right? Through out of the box, through Azure ADP1, PowerShell, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to cobble them. The one thing I just wanted to say, in reference to that though, and I love this, and this is something I harp on all the time, make it easy to do the right thing. People have to work. They're going to get their job done. So as you're going in IT and you're looking to operationalize this, always though keep in the back of your mind, are there other ways that people could do the wrong thing if I'm not providing them the avenue? So you want it to be the appropriate, absolutely for compliance. But if you ratchet too far down, the days of being able to keep the genie in the bottle, they're gone, right? If people have smartphones, they're going to get around things. So make it easy to do the right thing, plan And the other piece is, we don't so much have it here, but there are so many features. You have the capacity in IT now to really be a true hero, because the features and things, maybe they don't get everything day one, but as a part of that plan, this is what will roll out day one. And then have a regular plan of release where maybe you're just, as you've gotten comfortable, turn certain features on, announce them, educate the user populace, and then you're going to look like a hero because you continue to enable them to do the right thing, and they're going to be much more willing to come to you or to be patient if they see regular progress.
100%. Now, another example, right? So how do we make it easier? So one of the things that's available in Teams, it's the concept of using templates. So
Yep.
the idea is you can take a use case. So as Mike mentioned, let's say project management, right?
Yeah.
So let's say your use case project management, you can pre-create a template for project management. In this case, it's for internal projects, and predefine the channels, the tabs, even the documents, so that when somebody, especially if I'm a project manager, I don't have to create a team from scratch and figure out, okay, what do I add? It's ready to go. An example I want to show you, so I want to show you a quick demo here. So one of the things to make it easy to do the right thing is we have another app called My Hub. It bolts onto Microsoft Teams, and our customers can easily, and when I say our customers, you don't have to be IT, meaning the business end users, right? They can make a request, right? So let's say they can make a request two ways. Either if they already know what they're doing, so they can say, oh, HR onboarding. And you know what? I want to create from an existing template. There you go. So there's a template already ready-made, right? And as soon as I hit next, because this is a common process for HR, then as soon as they hit next, behind the scenes, the team will be created, the channels, the templates, the documents, and all the appropriate policies would be in place as well. Remember the slide I showed you, right? Provisioning, how to enforce policies and lifecycle. Once HR starts using this, it doesn't mean that they can do anything they want, even though I'm the owner of the team. Because part of the policy says I can't randomly create subsites off of the SharePoint site. I cannot invite external user. So all those rules are already there, which makes it easy for me to do the right thing. I won't fumble around and start doing things I'm not supposed to. Another option is maybe, you know what? Maybe people are so new, they don't even know what they want. Maybe what I could do is, instead of saying I want a team, here, I'll just say I'm going to request a workspace, but instead of picking a template, I'm just going to answer questions. What are you trying to do? I'm working on a project, or less than 5,000. Yeah. You already have a workspace? No. You like email? So this is more of a friendlier method, right? So it's friendly. I won't be intimidated. I don't know what Teams are, SharePoint, Yammer. So I just answer these questions, and again, based on the use case I'm trying to do, it will provision the appropriate technology. So that's step 2, right? Identify your user groups or your pilot user groups, and then use case. Step 3 is design the test plan. Now, why do we need a test plan, Mike?
Well, I mean, well, besides the 3 points you have laid out here, really when we talk about that plan, how are we going? You need to know, how are we going to communicate with users? And again, I think a lot of this, it helps both the team rolling it out and doing the testing, as well as those groups that are participants, right? They know what to expect. They know how to interact. They know how changes. It's all around that, setting expectations and getting the process so that that pilot is going to be as smooth as possible from both perspectives.
And an important part that Michael mentioned is, a pilot is essentially a controlled test, and your participants know that. So you got to also set the expectation. Look, you're part of this pilot. You're going to help not only us, you're going to help yourself, but as a part of helping us is you got to give us feedback. And again, the feedback cannot just be random. That's the point with a test plan is It guides our thinking. It zeroes in on specific use cases, so you're not boiling the ocean, and it helps the communication. And guess what? It provides your participants a feeling of, look, they're part of a bigger thing here. It's not just IT pushing it down, but they're giving you feedback of what's working, what's not. So here's an example.
The other thing, just to kind of throw out there, I mean, it also provides, since you're doing that and you're providing those channels of communication, that ready expectation around that, that's going to allow you, you know, as you're testing, like in this test plan, to be able to monitor in an ongoing basis and iterate, right? You may change course and iterate slightly in an agreed change, you know, management process, but it's going to give you touch points so that you know, hey, maybe we need to make a change here to improve the pilot.
So let me highlight one example here, and I'll kind of talk you through how you do this, right? So let's pick the first one. Sample use case. Joe needs approval from his manager, Jill, who is in another state, before sending the contract to his client. So maybe Joe works for sales. Joe sends his manager a message in Microsoft Teams to get a quick response. He adds in a colleague while they're talking, and maybe he figured another colleague can help answer some of the questions from the manager. He adds in a colleague to add some additional context to the request in that chat, right? So as you know, in Microsoft Teams, the one-to-one chat, you can add people in halfway. Upon approval, Joe sends a happy face meme after the chat. Joe's colleague sends Joe a new chat to offer congratulations. So that's a use case. And then what we want to find out is, okay, what's the experience like? Finding a contact. Were you able to do that? Check, test completed, initial experience. Now this part, to make it easy, you can standardize it. You can use red, yellow, green. Red being hard, yellow, okay, green, great. You can do that, and then maybe some notes, right? And just by capturing all this, so you now have a quantifiable way of figuring out if Teams indeed made that use case much better. I have a boatload of use cases. So in fact, let me fire up this Excel sheet here. So these use cases are around just the calling in the chat. I was working with a customer around their Skype to Teams migration. We did a pilot. So these are some of the use cases around the chat, around the meetings, around the calling. Are you guys interested in these templates? If you are, hit us up on the chat. What do you think? If this is useful, let us know.
Yeah, I was going to say, these are great not just examples to show, but, you know, folks, this is something that you could take right away and hit the ground running.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell you what, everything we're showing here, you'll get access. The PowerPoint, these templates, documents I'm going to show, I'm going to zip it up into a 50 gig zip file and email as an attachment. All right?
No. I did see somebody said would definitely be interested though. And the other last part, just to throw out there, and this gets into this, right? Because this helps set that up. Post your pilot, you're going to have training and communications going out. Well, you're going to have a lot of things learned that, you know, there may be organizational pieces that surface differently, right? As far as how somebody interacts and those expectations, you'll be able to feed those right back into your next one. And I'm going to shut up.
100%. Now, I just want to address some questions. Is MyHub available? Yes, it's available. You go to the App Store, but the catch with MyHub is it's at the tenant level, meaning your IT has to enable it. It's still not available in GCC, just like Ava, because GCC just enabled apps yesterday, but it will be available sometime for GCC as well. But yeah, it's available today. If you have tenant level access, you could go start playing around with it. If not, talk to your IT and they can get it for you. All right, so step one, we said define your pilot objectives. Step two, figure out pilot group use cases. We talked about step three, design test plan. Step four, establish communications and training strategy. When we think about communications and awareness and training, it's not just sending people to watch a video or attending this webinar. While we appreciate it, it's not enough. You got to have a full-on strategy on how do you drive awareness and get people excited, engage people to learn and to use, and be independent in a way where they don't have to keep relying on IT to do things, right? and then measure the effectiveness of what you put together, the use cases, the test plan, the training. We'll talk about training in a second, to see how much it worked in the pilot, so you can either scale it for production or improve it when you do production deployment. So some examples, and all of these are from Microsoft, and I'm sure, Mike, you've experienced this internally when y'all kicked off teams. But these are just some examples. What's cool about Microsoft is they're sharing all their assets out there, and I'll have a link for you where you can get all this stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of our big advocates heading this up at Microsoft, Caruana Gatimu, she's been working, with her teams tirelessly to put out quality content, and it's all freely available. And one of the things, funny enough, that I'm spending a lot of time with customers, how do you consume and then implement?
Yeah, and here's the phases that the Microsoft IT team went through. And again, they were so gracious to share this on how they drove awareness and engagement and communication, and what the things look for. And like what Mike says, I'll have a link later. And once we're done, we'll share you all the assets that Microsoft is making available publicly. Downloadable resources. And these are really nice, well-made assets, from brochures to PowerPoint. You put your own logo, take the Microsoft logo out, put your own logo, and tell your boss you worked on it for a week. So that's good. No, don't do that, because they'll find it online. So, but no, it's already made. So communications, driving awareness, and the next part is training strategy. In the training, short, simple, focus on the why. Again, focus on the scenario. Focus on showing the value. Look, if you use this today, it's going to save you time. It's going to save you money. It's going to make it easier for you to work with your colleagues. That should be the forefront and not the feature or the function. Again, some training resources. And one thing that I really love is, and again, this is free, it's the learning pathways. I'm sure, Mike, you can talk a lot about this. What is this, and how is it used, and what's the purpose?
So learning pathways, and this is something I've worked with some very large customers. They've rolled out worldwide. It is a open source learning portal. So you can go into the SharePoint provisioning services, provision learning pathways. We update the content that's in there quarterly, but more importantly, it gives IT control so they can determine what you want to expose. Again, maybe we haven't rolled out this planner yet or some other piece. You can turn on and off those pieces there. You can supplement with your own content. So that's one of the things I show customers, how to create quick, like you were saying, little bites, right? Based off of things like the pilot, little training pieces, little snippets. You can use PowerPoint recording to do that, publish it in the stream, drop it into here. And then the beauty of it is, because it's a SharePoint site / application, you can then take this, create an app in Teams itself, pin it as an app globally for your users right on the left-hand side, so that all of that training is available at hand, front and center. You can even put it as well into the app launcher in 365, but now you have a place that you can readily iterate and customize. It's freely available for all customers. It is open sourced, and it's a great way to get started.
Absolutely, and I love this, and it's very easy to use. Essentially, you're deploying a SharePoint site collection, but it's constantly being updated, which is something I love. A couple of other questions here. Is MyHub going to be free? So MyHub is free for 3 months. It's a product that we have. Now, if you want to do something similar without, for free, you can PowerShell it, but as you know, you can write all these custom code and constantly update it. So MyHub is a paid for product after 3 months.
And it's supported.
It is supported, absolutely.
Right.
But the functionality of templates, it's out of the box. The only thing you have to keep in mind is, again, you have to know PowerShell, provision those templates, and constantly update it once the templates needs to be updated. So that's the difference between MyHub, where everything's automated and supported, and there's an interface for the end user. Okay, step 5. So we talked about
real quick, one other question. They wanted to clarify on pathways. They said, do you have to have Office 365 to access this, or do you need to have Teams enabled? So just a quick throw out. Number one, to instantiate it, to provision it, you have to be at that tenant admin level to go ahead and provision it. But then users just need access to SharePoint. So yes, it is Office 365 only, but you do not have to have Teams deployed. You could turn off the Teams training that's in there. Maybe you're just doing Exchange to roll out in SharePoint. So you have the control over that. It is a SharePoint portal site. You don't have to have Teams, but you can instantiate it right in Teams.
Yeah, and what I've seen with customers too is you can pop learning pathways as a tab in Teams, so people are still in Teams.
Yeah, well, I've been doing it with a couple. I have 2 big customers and a third one piloting. They're all 3 worldwide orgs that have pinned it on the left-hand side globally, not even tabs, so that you don't have to do it, site by site. It's just there. People click, and that's their training.
So what you're saying, yeah, let me show you what Mike is here on the left, right? So
yes.
Yeah.
Right at the top, right above activity, they put it. Boom.
There you
training.
Go. Learn this.
Yes.
All right. So step 5. So now, hopefully, at this point, you've prepared enough. You got your use cases, your training plan, communication strategy. Let's do the pilot. So the goal is to drive sustainable adoption. And the idea here is you want to get people excited with the possibilities of Teams on how it could facilitate positive change. But in addition, this third one is important. While we define use cases, what's going to happen is people will find other things they could do with Teams, and which is okay, which is great. So you need to empower and assist the people in the pilot to be able to do things outside of what they agreed upon for the use case. Provide them resources. Again, like learning pathways would be great because they could learn other stuff around Teams or other stuff around Office 365, and provide a way to help them as effectively as you can. And the reason why is this: if you want adoption to happen, and you go back to the old way of, for any questions they have to fill in a ticket request. After 2 days, people are like, you know what, forget this. I'm just going to go back to my email because my needs and my questions aren't being answered. So that whole model alone does not work. There needs to be a model where you can empower and assist people, which we'll talk about more in a second.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you land right away when you conduct your pilot is your contextual training. We talked already about putting together a solid training strategy. And I just want to reiterate here, make sure it's relevant, applicable to their day-to-day activities. And it doesn't have to be in-person training. It can be on demand through learning pathways, lunch and learn, and keep it interactive. And make sure you give homework, meaning they don't just attend training for training's sake and say, okay, now that you've attended training, project managers, right after this, when you start a new project, do it in Teams. You're not going to create a file share, or you're not going to create just a SharePoint site. New projects will be created in Teams, and based on the process and the use case we talked about, pick this template. This is how you do it, etc.
Just real quick to throw it out there, one thing you might want to do, again, to encourage the use of Teams and to make it interactive and grab stuff, use Teams live events, right?
There you go.
So yeah, it's recorded on demand. You can make those videos available again right within Teams from Stream, but allow you to do that so they're accessing it for their training, for their interactivity. And then finally, the last part with that learning pathways, one of the things that we typically do is leverage a part of this service, Yammer, for self-service groups, and we embed them right within the learning pathways or Teams so that people can access and interact right from there.
So, Mike, there's a question on learning pathways. Is the content automatically updated, or would the admin have to approve it? What's the deal on that?
Yeah, so there are features that we do automatically. The content is not actually stored when you deploy it. It's not stored there. They're deploying that content out to GitHub. It will light up, but then the admins have control over what they expose and what they don't expose. We do have an update process for the web parts themselves if we ever update that. But content-wise, that automatically is available. It's just a matter of the admin turning on or off a view to it.
And one of the things that you mentioned, and this is what we encourage folks a lot when they do a pilot, create a team's pilot team.
Yeah.
Meaning everybody involved in the pilot, create a team for it, and perhaps each channel is for each use case, and track the status of the pilot within that team. So not only are people using teams for their use cases, but they're engaging, they're tracking, they're experiencing the pilot within teams as well. Pick a specific date or time period to launch and do the pilot. The pilot ideally should be only a short period of time. It can range from 2-3 weeks to 3 months, depending on how much or how less you want your use cases to be and how big the pilot group would be. But make it defined. Don't make it like a never-ending pilot. Plan engagement events, as we've described, to increase participation. One thing
make it fun.
One thing you'll find is even though people sign up for a pilot group, we've seen if you don't put together a solid communication engagement plan, you see people taper off. Because
I was going to say too, you know, that whole plan to increase participation engagement events. I had a very large pharma, worldwide pharma, and they've done a number of quarterly events, and I got to come in and be one of their booths, right? The fun guy, come over, but they made it exciting, and they did it at some of their key locations to generate enthusiasm, excitement, had giveaways, etc. And it's a great way, you know, they tracked, go get your card stamped by all these things and get X. But it's a great way to intersect and to pull marketing in and to get folks excited about what you're doing.
Because the reality is, keep in mind when you're doing a pilot, this is only a small group of people doing what they're doing, and they can't do it with other people outside of the pilot, right? So sometimes if you don't keep the engagement going, they're like, you know what, I'm too busy for this. I'm working with this legal team, and they're not even this pilot, so I have to go do email. So it may come across as double work for a period of time, which is true. I'm not
give them a reward,
sugarcoating it, but always paint a picture like you're in this for a bigger cause. Not only will it help you, but it will help validate and help the rest of the organization. As I was describing, establish scalable support. One cool thing, if you use Teams for the pilot, one customer I was working with, they had a channel for pilot support. So they did the support there, not just IT helping, but the people in the pilot helping out each other, which is cool. And then they had the learning pathways embedded in the team so they can help themselves. And anything that's more of a heavy lift, then IT can come in. So the idea is you can, you know, you don't have to wait for IT to help you all the time, but you have a model where you can help yourself, the pilot community can help, and then IT can take on bigger and more complex things. And gather feedback. Again, if you are a large organization and you have a formal pilot and feedback process, I've collected all these templates that I'm happy to share.
So wait a minute. So you're going to roll out and give people access to those end user survey templates?
What's that?
That end user survey template, you're going to make it available, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. I just made your job easier, Michael.
That's right.
Okay, let's see. I got another question. Okay, cool. What do you guys think so far? I mean, hopefully this is beneficial. Just drop a quick note if you think this is useful, not useful. I should wear a hat the next time to match up with Mike. But
you're better looking than me. That's why you don't need the hat.
But hopefully this is practical and engaging for you. But in all seriousness, you know, this is something near and dear to us, and hopefully this has been of value to you. Okay, so step 6, measure success. Right, so we said, look, you got to figure out your objective, come up with use cases and who's part of it, come up with a test plan, come up with a communication and training plan, and do the pilot. Once the pilot is done, measure success, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Meaning, everybody may feel good, but if you can't prove and show that it actually worked, it's actually valuable, now we should do it for the whole organization and make a case for it, then it's a moot point. This is where you go back to your scorecard. Remember that scorecard where I showed earlier, your test plan,
Right.
and demonstrate that you provided true value, not only from a qualitative perspective, your use cases, right? So this is a qualitative type of measure. Yeah, we were able to better collaborate. What was achieved? Increased global spread of business. How is it measured? 15% improvement of innovations or products or services. And then from a quantitative perspective, you can track the activity of the pilot group in Teams. So you can go to central admin, you can go to reports and look at this, right? And now you can compare and contrast, well, these people use this much email prior to the pilot, for example, but now during the pilot, email decrease, attachments decrease, we save storage, we have one version, and you can come up with all these different metrics. And you can see this directly in Office 365. And then you want to capture success stories too, and this is key. While you may be able to prove from a quantitative and qualitative perspective based on the scorecard, nothing beats stories from the ground on how people are getting their job done faster, better, sooner. You know, one of the best stories I've heard, I had the opportunity to work with the Belgian National Police. It's like their FBI out in Belgium. Their police force out on the streets are using Teams on their phone to fight crime, to capture data, and we worry about sharing files, right? Those are really cool stuff.
Well, and the beauty of it is, I mean, storytelling is the best way to, people resonate and can connect to a story, not just stats, right? So it's important that we want to let the org know, hey, we're done with the pilot. Yeah, and here's our success. But by capturing stories, it allows people to relate, to, you know, to put a face to things. And then that just helps with the broader promotion of it and putting it out.
So Mike, you got to read this question. I think it's a question that's very important for you.
Yeah.
It says, we're dying to know though, if that is an Oscar sitting behind you, Michael.
I want to thank the Academy. It is an award for video and all that, but it is not Oscar. This was from the Microsoft Worldwide Technology Org.
You know, they should do a category in the Oscars for the best technical webinar. I think we have a fighting chance. Now, once you measure your success, you got your stories, develop your production deployment plan. And this is now big time. This is the show, right? Where, okay, we've done the pilot, we've learned so much, let's hit it big. Now, what does a production deployment plan look like? Somebody was asking on the chat earlier, do you have like a 90-day plan? You know, as you asked that, I figured I'd put it together for you. Here's an example of a 90-day plan, including the pilot, right? So this is the scoping phase, POC phase, pilot phase, rollout. Once you've rolled it out, how do you operationalize and run it, and all this good stuff. Yeah, if y'all are keen to have it, just let us know on the chat. We'll put it in the package as well.
Put it out there. Just so I will answer this later, but the person who asked about Yammer and Teams, I'll touch on that at the end.
Okay. Oh yeah, there you go.
We didn't forget you.
All right, cool. So hopefully, you know, you have a good sense, and you know, when Mike and I put this together, we want to make it very practical. I'm sure there's tons of content out there. We're gonna share all that, but one of the key feedback we always get from customers is like just give me a formula, give me a recipe, and hopefully that's what we've done. Certainly there's tons of content out there, but with that, what was the question? Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, sure. So the question, let me go back here. Where's that? They said, great stuff. So is Teams taking over Yammer, or does it still have a functionality in the workplace, or is Teams taking over all of it? So the short answer is Yammer's going nowhere. They're different focus, right? When we think of Teams is where you get your work done. It's focused around a team. It has, you know, a limit in the physical size, et cetera. Now, we were talking about, Dux was mentioning using Teams to facilitate the pilot, because the pilot by nature has a finite set of users in that self-service discussion, and you can keep it all right there. Having said that, it's very common, if you think about Yammer, Yammer are topical focused employee self-service groups for discussion, Q&A, people can post questions, peers can answer, you can have subject matter experts. That's still valid, and Yammer is getting more and more integrated across the board. Frequently, what I do with customers is we leverage that in learning pathways and integrate it directly in. It's not going anywhere. It scales unlimited, right? So I can have a group have 1 million people in it.
So Mike, all right, check this out. I'm gonna try this analogy and see if it works, right? This is the analogy I use. Think about it this way. When you go to work, right? Yammer is your cafeteria. At lunch, I go down to the cafeteria. A lot of people from different departments or my team, we talk. Hey, how's it going, Mike, at engineering? Oh, yeah, okay. So you don't work in Yammer. You catch up, you talk. Now, as a result of that conversation, wow, Mike, you're doing forging. That's cool. Can we meet next week and let's start a project on forging? That's where Teams come in. Teams is your conference room, where Yammer is your cafeteria. You hang out, you talk to people, catch up with people, buzz company-wide. Teams is you go to a conference room or a meeting room and get stuff done. And you work there, all the stuff's there, your calls, your notes, your documents, and it's only to a limited group. Now, whatever you produce out of Teams, let's say the project is done, you have all the documents, you have a report, a proposal, you take that piece of paper and you take it to your company library for anybody to access, which is called SharePoint.
SharePoint.
Right? So that's where your repository of knowledge is. That's where it's stored in SharePoint. So like Mike said, it's not going away, right?
Cafeteria, conference room, the library.
That's right.
Where I get scolded.
Keep quiet.
That's me.
All right, hopefully that helps out. We've got about 2 more minutes. Let's see. Okay, good.
Wow, we're getting lots of questions.
All right, Bob. By the way, friends, there's no way we can answer every question, just like any webinar. Not only we get all this recording, we'll post a blog post with all the unanswered questions, and make sure you get that as well.
And you can hunt us down, my shameless plug, you can hunt us down at LinkedIn, linkedin.com, where professionals connect.
So we're already an AvePoint customer. Thank you so much. What tools do we already have to apply governance and provisioning? So I'm not sure which tools or solutions you bought, but for enforcing governance provisioning for Teams is Cloud Governance and MyHub. What I showed you earlier, MyHub, this guy is part of our Cloud Governance solution, where you can set up templates, you can put policies, and if you have Cloud Governance, you could do this today. Let's see. Does Microsoft Teams allow the transfer of calls between desktop and mobile?
Yes. And I do it all the time because I'm on the go. So I'll be here on my PC and I'll transfer and I'll head out to the car and hit the road.
Last question is kind of vague. Is there a recommended deployment for a lockdown version of Teams in terms of policies? It's sure, you could do whatever you want, but what are you talking about policies, right? Like who can access it, no external users, you can. I would say, and I know you're going to have a call to action here. It's really where you start talking about, look, we need to work with some folks who have been there, done that, because saying, is there a recommended for lockdown, I hate to say it, but it depends. What's your org? What's your compliancy requirements? There are so many factors. Are you under ITAR? Are you under HIPAA? Are you under FedRAMP? What are your constraints that you need to operate within? But the answer is yes. The technology is there to help you tweak and configure what your business requirements are. How do you do a proliferation of teams? That's where we go back to governance. Remember that one slide I showed way earlier? When you think about governance, provisioning, the enforcement of policies as you manage it, and then information lifecycle. What you can do, you can actually set policies and say, hey, if this team is not being used for 90 days, ask the owner. If they don't want it, chuck it.
Yep.
Or if a project is done, depending on the classification of the team, well, if this is classified as SOX or Sarbanes-Oxley, move the team, keep it for 7 years, and make it read-only, because that's required by financial regulation. That's how you prevent proliferation. You don't just leave it alone, because if you leave it alone and expect people to clean it up, delete it, move it, ain't gonna happen. Okay. Last question. I love this. Can I start my teams on my mobile, like WhatsApp, when you start the phone active without any user action? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can even pick it up on your computer or tablet.
Yeah, that's mine.
All right, this has been so much fun. Hopefully this has brought great benefit. We are grateful. We would love to help you. As AvePoint and Microsoft, we partnered together dearly. So if you think we can help you, we can come in and do a simple one-day workshop, or help assess your team's governance, or even do a pilot with you side by side. So hit us up, let us know. We are so excited about teams and the potential of teams changing the modern workplace. And feel free to connect if you have other questions. I'm sure Mike would need more connections on LinkedIn. I think you max it out, right?
I don't know. I don't know about that, but yeah, I mean, and just to his last slide, you know, when we talk about services, AvePoint is one of our premier partners for delivering these things. And it's funny because a lot of the questions that I know that we weren't able to get to are around this very area, right? Around governance assessment, around setting up and operationalizing things like expiration of guests, et cetera. All that can be provided for, but you know, sometimes you just need some help doing it.
Yeah. So with that, thank you everybody. Until the next webinar, thank you, my friend Mike, and
Absolutely
really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks everybody.